everybody? This is Dr. Regina Bradley, and this is Outkasted Conversations number 12. And I'm here with the fantastic, she just always looking snatched and looking right, Dr. Kaila Story. What's going on, Dr. Story?
Hi.
How you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and thanks. Glad the semester is over. Praise the Lord.
Oh, my God. Hallelujah for the semester being over.
Yeah, so you got to answer the question to get into the club. How did you become outcasted?
The first time I became outcasted was probably in high school when I started listening to, music with like swear words and stuff like that. Before, my music was pretty regulated by my parents, but once I got into high school, I was able to listen to all this music with like curse words and stuff like that. And I think it was their AT Aliens album, and then I ended up going back after that album and listening to more, and I just, I fell in love with them, namely Andre 3000. Fell in love with him, yeah, and just it kept getting better and better with Outkast. I mean, I love all their albums pretty much.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so you are an associate professor,
Yeah.
gender and women's studies at University of Louisville, right?
Yes.
So I know one of your areas of interest is queer theory, and a lot of people, might not necessarily know what that means. So could you give us a quick one-on-one on what queer theory is?
Queer theory essentially is theory that challenges every other theory in addition to building its own paradigms to understand institutions like heteronormativity, homophobia, transphobia, also the destabilization of gender categories, what we come to understand as a real man or like a real woman, right? Queer theory complicates our understandings and understandings of those types of conceptions by articulating the fact that most identity is in fact performance, right? And not in an entertainment type of way, but in an embodied type of billboard type of way, right? If we recognize that the body has symbols on it and signs that can be read from it, right, such as race and gender, and there's an automatic inference of identity based upon these types of categories. And so queer theory seeks to destabilize all of these things. That's why it's my friend.
What are some of the ways that we can use queer theory to think about and complicate, what Outkast means in terms of gender and race performance?
Well, especially and particularly with Andre 3000, right? Big Boy's look and aesthetic has changed, I feel like, over time, right? But he kind of keeps that same type of cool, masculine posturing that is in some ways normative, but in other ways non-normative because of his close affiliation and friendship with Andre, right? Whose look has completely changed from, let's say, Southern Playalistics to when he gets to Hey Ya, right? And he's donning wigs and all of this. And I remember when Andre's look started changing, I mean, there were all these late conversations around, well, what happened to Andre 3000, and what's wrong with him? And it was always this Erykah Badu link. I don't know if you heard that, but this rumor that somehow the men who dated Erykah somehow started performing gender differently. Andre 3000, Common Sense, right? Common Sense started wearing them half tops and them crocheted hats, and for Andre. I especially love it, right, because he knew, I'm sure, that he represented this kind of quintessential, sexy, masculine archetype. And what he's done after all of this fame is change and alter his aesthetic in some ways, like very much like Prince, right? Where his hair is long, and he's not necessarily wearing makeup, but he definitely has some mascara on them lashes. I mean, them lashes, are over. I love his lashes. So I think that we can look at Outkast in terms of them complicating gender, especially like Andre 3000, right? That he doesn't necessarily appear less masculine, although he's donning gender non-conforming attire, which is very interesting. He kind of shows a spectrum of masculinity, and in a lot of ways we understand femininity to have a spectrum, and we understand masculinity to be very rigid. So he, definitely they complicate stuff in terms of that.
So can we go back for a second when you were talking about the spectrum of masculinity in hip hop? I'm really intrigued by what you mean by that because on the one hand, when I'm thinking about when Outkast first came out in the early '90s, there was a specific type of hip hop masculinity that was accepted as the norm, right?
Mhm.
It's like, you have the New York swag, you got the Timbs, you got the J's, whatever, and then you have Outkast come out with socks and sandals and A-Town hats and kind of just really, I mean, to an extent, would you say that that's the way that they started to queer this idea of hip-hop masculinity because they weren't from the same space that hip-hop was being produced on a larger and more accepted level?
Yeah, I definitely think that their locale in the South has a lot to do with um, their varied performance and how it didn't necessarily match the temperament of the East Coast and those kinds of masculinities. I think that the South is very peculiar. On the one hand, it seems as if because of the heavy Christian influence that it would be very rigid in terms of gender and gender performance. But I found since I've been down here that, I mean, it's just as diverse in gender variance as East Coast, West Coast, all of these things. It's just really an untapped and uninvestigated area because it's seen as this really antiquated, old-fashioned place. We don't often associate the South with new trends in terms of gender and gender variance, but I disagree. I mean, I feel like there is a lot of it down here, and yeah, so yeah, yeah,
No,
and
no.
and I feel like too, like in terms of like Andre and Big Boy, what I noticed about them was they're kind of like the first like Kanye's to me in the sense of, Kanye is known as that young bull who's still very masculine, right? But he's always talking about his feelings. He's always talking about his feelings and his feelings being hurt. I mean, every album Kanye come out with, almost every song is about him being hurt or in his feelings or feeling some type of way. I mean, he couches it in this like, yeah, up against the wall when I'm choking you, but it's really like I'm crying, sad. and so like he's upset and he's upset in his feelings, and I think Outkast started doing that with their lyricism, especially when they did what was the song about sorry Miss Jackson. Ooh,
Yeah, Miss
I am
Jackson.
for real. Right, so they're basically talking about how they feel almost inept in some ways as men, and they're apologizing to this kind of baby mama figure by saying like, what more do you want me to do, right? I mean, she's making it difficult for our relationship. I'm sorry to you, I don't mean to be disrespectful. So it's this southern kind of gentleman diss thing. I mean, it's an excellent song. I mean, and then even by the time you get to their more recent work, when you think about stuff like Roses,
Hmm.
you know, and you have Big Boy coming in there, crazy bitch, you know what I mean? And like, and it's like, I mean, they really showcased how they felt emotionally, and I felt like that started to bleed into, especially when it comes to Andre, it started to bleed into his aesthetic. The whatever he is feeling, he is going to express that through fashion. Definitely, and whether that means he's gonna have his shirt off with these knee socks, I mean, he goes with whatever he's feeling that day, that moment, so.
I want to go back to Erykah Badu because she seems to be the catalyst for change in what we understand in Outkast. And I don't think it's fair that people try to say that the reason that Andre, for lack of a better term, turned himself out, right, is because he's in this relationship with Erykah Badu. But it makes me think about the ways that even Erykah Badu herself, who's from Texas, you know what I'm saying? There's still that Southern aesthetic there, right? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the way that, how will we situate her within a Southern hip hop narrative, especially, in this conversation about being outcasted and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did not know that Badu was from Texas, baby. That's where Beyonce from. But but I think I don't know what it is about the South that kind of does that type of thing. I don't know. I mean, I think that in Southern places, sexuality is all over the place, and I'm talking about in terms of like the heat itself, the weather, the hotness of certain areas in the South, the humidity, the rain, like all those things are extremely sexual to a human being's psyche and, you know, emotional palette. And I don't know if that somehow, you know, Southern cuisine is decadent and delicious, and you know, when you eat it, you devour it. It's a whole experience. I mean, I don't know if it has to do with those things that create that. But I definitely think that there is a kind of subliminal eroticism within the South. I mean, I know, especially when I went to New Orleans, I visited New Orleans, that's how I felt. I felt like this is it's a sexy place, and not necessarily because of the jazz or the rich food, but just walking around, it's like, ooh, sexy around here. It's sexy. You know, I don't know. I feel like the weather, the humidity, or maybe it's just me, honey, but the South does that to me, and I feel like, I don't know if it's done that to them. And I also feel like Badu was different, right? I mean, people try to kind of will place her in a neo-soul way, like, you know, but she's different than even India Arie, right? India Arie's lyricism and her albums and songs, as much as they're about beauty and the empowerment of Black people, they don't necessarily focus on eroticism or any kind of eros, if you will. It's more about romantic love, whereas Badu is always somehow inserting in any song about how she's got the best this, or, you know, she, you know, the girl graduated magna cum laude, you know, but he still loved me with a GED. I don't want him, right? So she's always asserting her own sexual agency, and if she is with men, it's for her own benefit and pleasure, as opposed to it being some assumed role of hers. Or, you know, I remember in one interview, I don't know when it was, where she said that, you know, she wanted to deal with men so she could get their sperm so she could have babies, right? Babies for her, not necessarily babies for them. Or babies for the kind of world, right? And not a kind of service sacrifice thing, but definitely about her own pleasure. And I don't know if, you know, their relationship somehow with Badu opened them up to new expressions of identity, but I just remember people saying that about Andre once they had that baby, and, you know, he started, they felt like he started dressing different, and I didn't think it was, like, the timing wasn't that succinct at all to me. I felt like they were kind of moving at the same time, but it was just interesting to me that they linked his gender variance to a woman. They linked his gender nonconformity to a heterosexual, heteronormative relationship, which I find very interesting, that if males are able to go beyond what is expected socially and culturally in terms of their gender, it takes, like, some woman to bring that out in them. So I don't know if that's saying that women in our embodiment supposedly have a kind of gender variance or a certain acceptance, or, you know, I think it's not that at all. You know, because I think that, like, no, I don't think that it's that. I think it's more about them as individuals, you know, meeting, and, you know, him changing his aesthetic because that was what his spirit kind of was making him do, not from any kind of relationship or anything like that, you know?
No, I'm with you. And it was a really great segue into the next part of the conversation, is this idea of eroticism. So, you know, I had Treva B. Lindsay, one of the other pleasure ninjas.
Yes.
Yeah, so she was on a couple of weeks ago, and she gave a really dope discussion about, you know, the sonic implications of pleasure in Outkast. And your discussion of the erotic makes me want to ask you to expand a little bit, you know, what the erotic looks like. Can it be used as a tool for change as we hear it in Outkast? And then something else I was thinking about as you were, you know, discussing Erykah Badu is there a really thin line between eroticism and sensuality, and what the purpose of those two things are? So would you like to expand on that for me?
Yes, like, well, eroticism in and of itself doesn't necessarily directly link us to sexual prowess, sexual desire, or sensuality per se, right? Eroticism is a feeling and a concept that's beyond our own kind of carnal ideas of sex and those things. I mean, when Lorde uses the uses of the erotic, especially when she talks about women, in terms of that, is about them negotiating the eros within themselves and the things that bring them pleasure, right? And pushing that to the center of any kind of analysis that you would have. And in this case, you wouldn't get Black womanhood seen through a lens of perpetual victimhood, nor a lens of perpetual liberation and empowerment either. You would get a much more multifaceted and varied concept of what a kind of well-rounded meaning and understanding pleasure has in our lives, right? Particularly when it comes to that of Black feminist work. A lot of times when we get into Black feminism and Black feminist theory, right, you're hearing about, oh my goodness, Black women have been oppressed throughout centuries, throughout time and space, and this is so awful. And then you get that other narrative of Black women are empowered and we're resilient and we've resisted each and every step of the way at the same time that we've been oppressed. But what we don't uncover, what we don't hear is that how do and did Black women negotiate their own eros and their own forms of pleasure, even within oppression and especially within empowerment and liberation, right? And so, I mean, that's why, you know, I'm into pleasure. And to me, like, I understand it as something that elevates me in terms of my consciousness, my spirituality, and makes me feel much wholer than just a theory could, per se, right? It had to, the theory needs to be more complicated when we think about the complex lives that Black women lead and have led, right? So if we think, for instance, Ma Rainey, right, and her, right? I mean, pleasure was obviously at the epicenter of her existence, but so was oppression, right? Oppression, colored, and lack of political power and agency and all those things affected her life just the same, but that didn't stop her music from articulating the ways in which she was pleasured, she gave pleasure, she had pleasure. And I mean, she specifically, you know, focuses in on the sexual, and I do too, because I like sex, but and I do think that it's a definite part of pleasure praxis, you know, especially in the lives of women, and not sex in the way we understand patriarchal, dominant, oppressive sex, but like happy, free, independent, consciously chosen, consensual sex, right, that women want to have and are, you know, but not wanting to have because their partner wants to have it or because they're expected to have it, or, you know, right? And even if that's not their thing, I mean, some women aren't, you know, sexual like me, but you know what I mean? Like there's, you know, there's all sorts of ways in which pleasure is negotiated in the lives of Black women, whether it be dancing or music and those things. And I think that for Outkast, as much as, you know, I was talking about how they talked about their feelings, they're talking about their other feelings too, like their emotional feelings. I mean, like the one Andre song, I hope that you're the one, that one. If not, yes, you are the prototype. That's my shit right there. But then that one, and then he did some rap where he's talking about, he says, I see that you're one of a kind, which makes you kind of the one, like, you know, and I don't know what song that was from, but that's like one of my favorites lines. I mean, he has such great lyricism, him and Big Boy together, but they talk about the gamut of their human experience. And just because they are performing these masculinities does not stop them or impede them in their lyricism to talk about the gamut of that experience, whether that be emotional suffering or happiness or feeling like an alien, feeling like you're from another planet in outer space, which is like in the tradition of, you know, Sun Ra, right? Who feel like, you know, I'm from Jupiter, you know what I mean? And this kind of Afro-futuristic type thing, you know? So I don't know. I mean, I hope that answers it. I know I was like digressing, going all over.
No, I think, I mean, like, you know, just to acknowledge the fact that there is a human experience in itself is a form of eroticism, because it actually is acknowledging the complexities that you're talking about. Dr. Story, you've been dope. Tell the folks how they can holler at you, what you got going on, your new projects, anything.
Okay, well, you can find me on Facebook. I'm Kaila Story. Even though my middle name is Adia, Afrikete is my chosen middle name. It's in it's a figure in Audre Lorde's Tar Beach, which means Black Pussycat. I feel like that's me. And so you can find me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, which is Doctress Story, and that's DOCTRESSSTORY. And I also have a podcast that comes on WFPL every week called Strange Fruit, Musings on Politics, Pop Culture, and Black Gay Life. And you can find that out and check out old episodes on strangefruitpod.org. And that's it. If you're in the Philly area, come and see the Beyonce panel with the Pleasure Ninjas and see what we mean about pleasure. And that's May 1st in the evening at Drexel. So, I mean, okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Story, for joining us. I'm Dr. Regina Bradley. This is Outkasted Conversations. We'll holler at y'all next week. Y'all be easy.
Bye.